Good morning. Can y'all hear me okay? Awesome. Good morning, everyone. We really appreciate you coming in person today. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. As mentioned, this will be recorded, so this is all, you can go back and look on it later. Myself, I am Caitlin James. If you have not already met me, I am the FDOT District Drainage Permits. I do have Brent Setchell here with me today. If you've not met him, I mean, most of you have if you've dealt with drainage. This is Brent Setchell, District Drainage Engineer. And then we have Victoria Howard. She's one of our consultants, RK&K, Liz Zarello, RK&K, and also Greg Lee, RK&K. They deal with our drainage connection permits. They're part of our contract. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Brent.
So thank you all for coming today. I'd asked Caitlin or challenged her to consider putting something like this on. And, obviously, for the most part, all the applicants do a great job of making submittals and, getting through the process fairly quickly. But there's a handful out there that seem to struggle. And so, hopefully today the goal is to kind of maybe, provide some tips and tricks or some of those little nuances that each project goes through to say, hey, maybe oh man, I didn't realize we need to do that. And again, our goal is not to delay you and cause you aggravation, even though that's a lot of times what happens. Our goal is to keep the public safe and keep our roads safe and to keep them, free of water. And so that's all we're trying to do. And our thing is that's why we have the criteria and the rules, is to make sure we can, those roads and those safety features are followed. And again, check those boxes to make sure that we can, get you your permit issued. So again, I appreciate you all coming today. Hopefully you'll find this beneficial and get something out of this. And again, can utilize the information today on your next connection permit application.
And kick it off. We'll pass it on to Liz Zarello. You going to start it? Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off. So as Brent alluded to today, we're going to cover everything permit related, from application all the way through approval. So that includes some different topics too, some helpful tips and tricks, some helpful references, and then some pre-scanned or pre-registration questions. So what is a drainage connection permit? The FDOT requires that any properties that are adjacent to them do submit for a permit. That can be either an exception or a full-blown permit, and is regulated by Chapter 1486 of the Administrative Code, and it does not regulate dewatering or activities for groundwater flow. So what qualifies as an exception? By rule, properties that do not drain to the FDOT either in the pre or post development condition, single family resident improvements are exempt, agricultural, and then minor improvements, which we'll touch on a little bit more in depth on the next slide. And there is also a exception questionnaire that is within the Drainage Connection Handbook that you guys can utilize to help get through that process. So the minor improvements, all of these topics here need to be met for it to be under a minor improvement. So no changes to the flow patterns, no increase in area of runoff draining to the FDOT. We're not altering any drainage conditions. And then the most important one on the bottom there is that total impervious area of 5,000 square feet, and that less than 40% of that is drained to the FDOT. And we'll get into a couple of examples of that in a little bit. And ultimately, the FDOT reserves the right to grant an exception. If it is adjacent, I would go ahead and just submit to us and give us the opportunity to look at it. And any site that drains towards the FDOT by a hydraulic connection is also not considered an exception. Just a little tidbit there for you guys. So just a couple quick little scenarios. You have a pond here that's on the back of the property, not draining to the FDOT. Would this qualify as an exception? Kind of need some more information, right? No. And the reason why is because a portion of that site in the existing condition is drained to the FDOT. Also, if you see that total impervious area of the site is greater than 5,000 square feet. So there's two reasons why that doesn't qualify. So on the next example, again, we have a development that's draining to a swale on the back of the property. So it's not draining to the FDOT. Would it qualify? No. That swale is drained towards the FDOT through a cross drain that crosses under the state roadway system, so it would not qualify. Now, oh, is this your slide? Sorry.
No worries. Is this thing on? Perfect. I didn't get to check my mic. So, permit versus exception requirements. So overall, the requirements are going to be the same. It's just your proof is going to be a little bit truncated, your documentation. So you would still need to file for a formal submittal through OSP. For your exception, you need to provide pre and post development drainage maps. Those are required. From the very outset from your projects, you always want to have those because that is what's going to determine whether your site is an exception or if it needs to be permitted. You will also need to submit a drainage memo, which is just a shorter form of documentation. So it's not a full-blown drainage report, but just a memo, and that would suffice. You will also have a reduction in calculations. Typically, this will require you to do or model all the 100-year durations. And that way we can verify the freeboard. And then usually the area and CN calculations as well to demonstrate a reduction of impervious runoff as well. For your permit, you would need to model all 36 of the department's storms that they have. Here we have listed some helpful resources. Highly encourage you guys to use these. Chapter 1486, that has a section of the exceptions in there. So I would encourage you guys to definitely read that. Your drainage connection permit handbook, the drainage manual and design guide. Now, the drainage connection permit handbook, that was last updated in 2020, and that's updated periodically, but the drainage manual and drainage design guides are updated annually. So you want to make sure that you guys do read those year to year. They do have a little printout that tells you what changes from year to year, but sometimes things change in there. So you want to make sure you're referencing the correct one when you're doing your designs. Also, you have your standard review checklist. You can utilize the FEMA studies and maps, USGS geological maps, Google Earth and Google Maps. In Google Earth, there is a tool in there where you can utilize the elevation profiles to look at your site or roadways, things like that. You also have your standard plans, the FDOT design manual, which is also updated on an annual basis. And then you can also reference the local water management websites for any existing permit information that you can use for your site.
I'd like to interject here to kind of keep it open here. And so going back, I think it's one of the big issues that we have is kind of that if I don't need a permit from you guys, I'm not draining to you. And it's like, well, by rule, even if you drain to us in the existing condition, you need to go get a permit from us. But getting a permit isn't the end of the world. It's just submitting that basic documentation. It's like, hey, yeah, we drained you in the pre-development, but in the post, we're taking all the water, I'm going to discharge somewhere else. That is fantastic. You guys are awesome. Way to go. Great job. Just send us that documentation so we can check the boxes and give you your permit. That's all we need to do. So we need that basic information, just that, hey, you know, yep, we're draining pre-post drainage maps. Here's what we're doing. And then the critical thing on that too is to where your pond is located at. If your pond is located adjacent to our right of way, we want to check that freeboard because if that pond overtops and busts its berm, where's it going? Right into our right of way. So what is that? You know, that's a hazard for us. We got to protect ourselves. That's what we're checking for on those things. But again, even let's say your pond is located in the back of the site, but you got an inlet in the front of the site. That pond stages up and the water goes out that inlet, drains to our right of way, same issue, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the things that we're checking for is to make sure that you're not causing an issue for our right of ways.
Right. Thank you, Brett.
Okay, so now we'll kind of go over the completeness of a submittal. So Caitlin does a really good job when these first come in. She's going to do a cursory review, and if we're missing any of this stuff, it will get kicked back. So please make sure you get all of this in there so we can get it actually to a review sooner. So we need the application forms and the required authorization signatures. Make sure that's in there. Signed and sealed survey. We need a drainage report or a memo, depending on what you're filing for. Most likely we'll need a geotech report, and if you do provide that, it needs to be signed and sealed, and then signed and sealed construction plans.
And I also like to note, especially with topographic survey, it needs to be signed and sealed in the manner that you're supposed to do it according to the state statutes. So if you're attaching a PDF of a seal and a signature to the survey, that's not going to be acceptable to the department.
So now we'll go a little further in depth on these different pieces. So for the drainage report, it needs to have a narrative. If you are doing any work within the FDOT right of way, then we need a write-up of what that scope is, whether it's a sidewalk, turn lanes, et cetera. We need to have those all important pre and post basin maps. We need your hydrology calculations. We need your modeling data, whether you're using ICPR or another software in there. Make sure you include all the input and output that was used for that. And then we're looking for pre and post summaries. There's a good example in Appendix D of the Drainage Connection Handbook on that. And then we'll touch a little more on calculations for work within the right-of-way in a minute. So for geotechnical data, we need soil type with the hydraulic soil groups. We need the boring data, perk rate, seasonal high, depth to a restrictive layer. And then if it is for a geotech, then it needs to be signed and sealed. We also do take stuff from Web Soil Survey. For construction plans, we need a key sheet. Please remember to put your permit numbers on there. The first time you submit, you may not have the full permit number. We often see people will put it in there as a with the year and the dashes with some X's in it. And that's fine. And then we'll update that once you have it. Make sure you include the datum that you are in. We need grading and drainage plans with all the drainage details that you have to construct your storm drain system. Driveway profiles needs to extend at least 50 feet past and include spot elevations, including on the right-of-way line. We need some pond information, which we'll dive a little further into. Erosion control for both on-site and if you are doing work within the FDOT right-of-way. There are cases where you will need erosion control on the FDOT right-of-way, even if you are doing no work there. And then there are some notes, standard notes that need to be included. So if you are doing work within the FDOT right-of-way, then we need some additional calculations for that. And this would be if you're adding a sidewalk and impacting a ditch, a turn lane. So these could include ditch calcs, storm tabs, spread calcs. Not all of them will be required. If it's a curb and gutter section, then you'll have spread calcs. So whatever is applicable. And then we will need the documentation if there's a existing FDOT permit or it's a permitted activity for the water management district, then all of that information to support that permit mod will need to be included. So for the pond, make sure that you include the design high water on the cross section, and that's going to be the FDOT and water management district storm. We need a detail for your control structure. Include the top of bank and pond bottom elevations, the seasonal high, and then in plan view, include all the geotechnical boring locations.
I also want to note, whenever you're doing work within the FDOT right-of-way, a lot of times there might be a turn lane addition. A really good example of this is State Road 78, which is in Lee County. It's also known as Pine Island Road if you guys have work along there. There is a ditch, which is actually not a ditch, it's a linear facility. So when you're proposing a turn lane through there and you're impacting the storage and potentially the treatment volume that's in it, that's going to automatically trigger an ERP modification. So if you are doing work along there, I highly suggest that you go ahead and schedule a meeting with South Florida, that's the local management district there, and they'll tell you exactly what's needed. So that way you can move forward with that ERP mod and kind of just make your whole permit process as smooth as possible. So basically the takeaway from that is if it just looks like a ditch, just hop on the local management website, check to make sure there's no permit there. That way that's not another hiccup through your process. And hopefully that makes that go a lot smoother for you guys.
Just to reiterate, folks. There was those roadside ditches that are adjacent to them, or there was a product there that was previously permitted, then you're required to do a permit mod. We have to do the same thing. You guys got to do the same. If it was previously permitted, then you're stuck doing a modification. If there's no permit there before, then you can utilize the exemption through software.
Yes. And even if it is an exempt activity, you still need to provide either some documentation to us telling us, hey, this is exempt, this is an email that we got from the local management district. Submit that just so that we have it, because we will ask you for it, even if it is an exemption. So you don't have to pursue the exemption. You can, like an email from the local management district will suffice if it is an exemption.
Yeah. You just get an email from them. We'll take that.
All right. So that's be great ahead of, well, for your clients. So that way you bill everything like you need to or help with that.
And we'll dive into that a little bit more in a bit.
Sorry. I
So
went
on
a
that
little too
previous
fast.
slide there, so this is our typical process. You guys submit, then it typically goes to a permit coordinator who will do a completeness check, make sure your application's complete, all the information's there. Then it will get assigned to Caitlin, who will then assign a drainage reviewer to the project. Then we upload all of our comments, and then it will go back to the permit coordinator who will redistribute the comments for us and all other disciplines. And this may happen several times before your process actually gets complete. And then the FDOT does have, go to the next slide, have a statutory clock. We do have 30 days to review your permit. It is on. I'll talk into the mic. I'm sorry. So we have about 30 days. Well, no, we have 30 days to review your permit. So typically, we usually try to turn it around a lot quicker, but we do have a full 30 days. So this is kind of what Brent and Victoria were talking about earlier. This is if you are making improvements with the FDOT right-of-way. If there is a previous permitted on the site or on the roadway, then you will need to either provide verification of exemption to us or a permit mod. If you do need a full-blown permit mod, you will have to submit an application to us that will have to get signed by Brent. Typically, we do not sign that until most of the comments have been addressed. This hopefully reduces the back and forth between the Water Management District and you guys. So when you do have this condition, and as always, you can always contact us and ask if it's needed, but do check, as Victoria said, the ARP sites for SwiftMud, South Florida, whatever Water Management District that you're within. Make sure that there's not an existing permit. We do check this while we're doing reviews as well. But yes, and if it is, we just need verification that your improvements aren't going to impact an existing permit, or we need the modification.
And if you need the mod, we do have a application template that's filled out. So get with us or Caitlin and she can provide that, and that will help you fill that out a lot easier.
Yep. So now we're going to kind of dive into a little bit more meat and bones. We're going to go through some design criteria and try to help cover that so it's a little bit more understandable to you guys when you do submit to us.
Brent has.
Yes, sir. Correct. Thank you, Brent. All right, so tailwater. Please, 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 please document your tailwater in your report. We don't know where it's coming from if it's just in a model and you guys submit to us. We need to understand how it was determined and how it interacts with your site. And there are some cases where you will have to model both a high and low tailwater condition. This is because we are checking both freeboard and discharge, and the tailwater could affect both of those. There's some direction on this in the Drainage Connection Handbook, the table right there that's highlighted on the slide. And then you can always reach out to your reviewer as well if there's any questions. Curve numbers. We see this a lot. If you guys are utilizing a type AD soil or BD soil, a dual soil hydrologic soil group, please utilize the higher value. Because most of the time with the high tailwater in Florida, you are in a type D condition. So please model that and include that in your calcs. Also, do not change the curve number from pre to post. It should be the same in both conditions. Unless you're adding pavement, then obviously it would be changed to pavement. But your impervious or your pervious area, I'm sorry, should not be changing. And there's guidance as well for that in the drainage manual, drainage design guide, and the Drainage Connection Handbook. Also, for your pond bottoms or anywhere there is a water surface, please utilize a CN of 100 for those areas when you're modeling all of your storms.
The next design criteria we're going to go over is the initial stage and recovery. So for your initial stage, that's going to be based on what type of facility that you have. So for the basis for the pond or vault initial stage for routing is going to be based on the following. So if you have a dry retention facility or a vault, the initial stage needs to be set at the 36-hour recovery stage, or the bottom if the recovery is less than 36 hours. For dry detention ponds, the initial stage needs to be set at the pond bottom or the orifice invert, whichever one is higher when the recovery is provided via the orifice. For wet detention ponds, the initial stage is just set at the control elevation. Now, if you're utilizing recovery and that's the basis for your initial stage, you do need to provide the recovery calculations, which is also known as a slug load analysis. And that needs to be in your supporting documentation. That's a pretty common comment that we give when we're trying to determine your initial stage. So the next design criteria is the freeboard. So for on-site freeboard, what we're looking at, the pond freeboard, let me just give a little brief definition. Your freeboard is going to be that vertical distance between the maximum 100-year design stage elevation of the pond to the inside of the pond berm. The freeboard has to be achieved for the overall site, not just the pond. So there are multiple locations that we're checking. You do need to provide 12 inches of freeboard for either the Water Management District design storm or the FDOT critical storm, whichever one produces the higher stage. So the district drainage engineer may consider a freeboard reduction to 6 inches for hard surfaces such as curbs provided around the perimeter. At driveway entrances and sidewalk connections, the department may reduce the freeboard requirement to 3 inches in order to meet driveway and sidewalk slope requirements. The FDOT critical storm freeboard requirement must be met at all pond and perimeter berms, curb, driveways. That way, if they were to overtop into FDOT's right of way, we need to be able to check that. So for an example, we have just a little cross section of a pond. You see we have our initial stage shown here, and just to show where that freeboard would be. When you have, when you have ditches that also border FDOT's right-of-way, those also need to meet the freeboard standards as well. And then I think one of you guys wanted to talk about that in particular, because that's something that's very common that we look at.
Well, and I guess with the ditches, if you're adjacent to the right of way, depending on if it's connected to your pond, if you're using it that way, then it could be looking at the freeboard based on the model. If it's a free flowing ditch, then we're looking at the normal depth in there. So there are different criteria for the that we would look at for what your design high water would be in that ditch.
And then also along terms of freeboard, these are the other areas that we're checking, and I touched on them a little bit, but I wanted to provide a little bit of a graphic for you guys. So where we're checking is the pond top of bank, driveway high points, the parking lot curb, and internal storm water system as well. So as Brent mentioned earlier, sometimes you have a secondary system that is connected to your pond. And so we are looking for inlets that are close to FDOT's right-of-way that if for whatever reason they were to overtop or surcharge, they would spill out and come into the DOT's right-of-way. So we are checking those areas. So in this graphic, we have an inlet that's right on DOT's right-of-way. There's also a sidewalk connection there. And these are just like, this is just like an example of where accidental discharges could happen and what we're looking for whenever we're looking over your applications. For offsite freeboard, the ditch freeboard is measured to the top of the ditch bank or lower edge of the pavement shoulder, whichever one is lower. Typically, a ½ foot is required for the 10-year design or the 10-year storm. This is also outlined in the drainage manual as well. So here we have an example of two different scenarios, one where your low point is the shoulder and the other where the low point is your sidewalk.
Okay, so another design criteria we're looking at is discharge. So the pre-development discharge or the queue allowable, this is the flow that was coming to the department right away, pre-development and just the right of way. So you could have half your site could discharge to the back. And in the future in proposed development, you are draining everything to the department. You are limited to the queue of what was coming there before. So there's two ways that you can do this. You can use a rational method to do this, or if you have depressional areas that you need to model, you could use a routing software. And then just note that if you are, whatever your basis is for that in the pre is going to be the post. So you can't use rational in the pre and then use a ICPR flow for the post condition. And then if you are discharging directly to an FDOT closed storm drain system, then there is a queue connected criteria. This is to look at flow that could be injected into the back of the inlet that was not previously going there before, and that is using the 5-year critical duration. Here is a list of all the storms that you will need to run if it is a permit. In some cases that we've touched on that you can get away with just 100-year, but this is the full 36 storms. And then there's also the 7-day and 10-day if you are in a closed basin. There is, we do allow you to run the 2-year instead of the 3-year because that aligns with the tables from NOAA better, which is right here. So just be aware when you do go to the site, there is a depth and an intensity at the top. So be sure that you're clicking on the right one. So here's the 2-year is provided. So we're allowing that, and you do need to interpolate for the 4 and 8 hour storms. For post development, the critical duration has to be less than the queue allowable for those storms. The queue connected is the area that was draining directly there, and then we're looking into the storm drain itself. And then sometimes we have cases where you will have both. You can have sheet flow from the frontage, and then you also are discharging your pond directly into a closed storm drain. So we have to look at both of those together. And you will need to meet both criteria. So here's an example. This is a kind of a snip out of what the summary tables that we're looking for from Appendix D. So in this case, we're trying to go for storm first. In this case, we have a few storms that are slightly higher in the storm for storm, but are less than the critical duration. So these may be accepted with the approval of Brenda.
So here's a couple of examples about the discharge that Greg was just talking about. So in this example here, portions of the site drain towards the FDOT right of way, and then other portions do not. So for your allowable queue, you would only be able to include that area that is draining towards the FDOT right of way. So you see that basin break there. Anything behind that would not be counted in your queue allowable. And then for proposed point discharges, if you have an entire site that's drained to the FDOT right of way, and then you are now proposing to discharge at a structure and one point to the FDOT right of way, we ask that you do it on the downstream end. If not, then we would need some additional calculations to make sure that we're not overloading that ditch system or the pipe system, whichever it happens to be. This table or this figure is actually from the Drainage Connection Handbook, and there's some more guidance there on that as well. And then for closed basins, basically all of the same criteria applies with the addition of running the 7 and 10-day durations. And then you would also have to provide volumetric calculations as well and make sure that your pre and post retention volumes have been met. So FDOT ditches, I know we get a lot of issues with these. Please make sure that you have vetted your ditch design with roadway, because any changes to your ditches will affect your drainage design. We don't like to check calcs more than once. We don't want you guys to have to do them more than once. So please adhere to the drainage or the ditch criteria outlined in the FDM. Typically, that's a 1 to 6 front slope, a 5-foot bottom ditch, and a 1 to 4 back slope. You can go to a 1 to 3. We are also asking that we have cross sections every 100 feet so that we can verify your calculations. And then we need to make sure that those calculations are included in your drainage memo or drainage report so that we can check them. We do not accept them separately. And then any ditch profiles and spot elevations also need to be included in your plans as well.
And I also want to know, when you are designing the roadway or redesigning the ditches that are within the FDOT roadway, please reference the FDM 215 for roadway safety. There is a figure in there that basically tells you what your back and front slopes can be. And that's been a comment that they have been giving out. So just to help you guys get ahead of that, please reference the FDM 215 roadway safety portion for your side slopes.
And there's also this table in there that shows you with the variable ditch bottom width what the front and back slopes that are allowable are. So please utilize this. We typically don't allow ditches less than 5 foot in width. If you do have extreme circumstances, limited right of way, or any issues, you can always request approval of a reduced bottom through the district drainage engineer. We would need to have calculations to verify that your freeboard and all of your conveyance works. You also need to maintain a minimum ½ foot of freeboard, as Victoria talked about previously. We are checking that to the lower of the right of way or the shoulder point. And then you need to make sure that you're utilizing your critical ditch. Don't just run a generic section or a typical. We need to see that most critical point that you're checking. And we also need velocity calcs just to verify that there's not additional lighting requirements that would be needed in your ditches.
And this figure off to the side is the figure that I was talking about just previously from the FDM. So this is what that looks like.
Okay, so moving on. Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Good. Okay. So that what they were just going over is probably one of the most challenging issues that we see out there is, again, a lot of our existing roadways may have a 1 to 4 front slope, and now we're asking you to put back a 1 to 6 front slope. And again, that's all in the name of safety. Likely that 1 to 4 was in a very rural area where there wasn't anything. Now there's new development coming in. And so that's one thing that there's a negotiation with that, because, roadway rightfully is looking out for safety. And so Dwayne and I and Kevin will all sit down and look out. All right, what criteria is most important to you? What criteria is most important to me? And we'll arm wrestle and figure out who wins, kind of a thing. So there's a delicate balance there. There might be some back and forth. There might be, several iterations to get through that to make sure we get a correct cross section in there, to make sure we get the safest that also works for drainage and not going to have any issues with you get water on the road or whatever. So it's definitely a balance there. So, but again, it's a challenge to fit all, that cross section within a limited right of way there. So we recognize that, and we're willing to work with you to figure out the best solution we can.
Yes, I was staring at Dwayne when I was talking about the roadway criteria there, because we had many meetings on that.
Yeah, we're not here to make your lives difficult. We are here to help. So if you do come across any of these challenges, just reach out to your reviewer. We'll get your answer. We'll talk it through. Some of you guys I've talked to a lot on the phone to try to help you work through your designs to get it permitted. So I am here to help. I don't want to be that roadblock for your client. So just hit us up. We're more than happy to help. Did this one already?
No.
Yeah.
Not yet.
No?
No, I didn't do that one.
Okay.
Okay. So pond outfalls, please do not place overflow weirs into the FDOT right of way. That is very much not approved. So we typically like control structures, standard control structures that therefore would not have erosion issues if they were overtopped or breached. Please keep your outfall pipes to a 12-inch minimum diameter. This is mostly for maintenance, so if something happens to it, they can replace it or fix it. And please do not use sump conditions. Bubble up structures are a maintenance nightmare. They tend to clog, then they malfunction, and they don't work. Please don't propose those if it's a last resort. No discharges over the sidewalks. No riprap. That is another issue for maintenance when they're out mowing. It's very hard to mow over riprap. And then please include any notes to connect to existing FDOT structures when you're connecting within the right-of-way. For curbed sections, please avoid inlets if possible with your driveway locations. I know that this isn't always the case. If you do have to impact them, then we need to either relocate them outside of the driveways or propose some options where they're not in the wheel path, maybe some different grate types on them. But you can coordinate that with your reviewer if it's a problem. Please check your pipe cover with any new structures that you're proposing and existing structures. And then we also need spread calcs. Anytime you are impacting a curb section of roadway, we need spread calcs. So please provide those with your structure or within your drainage report. Please maintain minimum gutter grades with all of your proposed improvements at 0.3% is required. If that can't be met on your existing roadway, you may need a special gutter profile. And if that's the case, please include that in your plans as well.
All right, now for pipe within FDOT right-of-way. So when you're designing your pipe systems or anything connecting to FDOT systems, make sure that you're maintaining the appropriate cleansing velocity. This is outlined in the drainage manual. Also, the minimum pipe size for any pipes within FDOT right-of-way is 18 inches. Now, that is not to be confused with your outfall pipe that may be coming from your pond if it is adjacent to FDOT right-of-way. That's completely different because that pipe needs to act as a secondary control. So for any pipes, your side drains, or anything connecting to a system, that needs to be 18 inches. Unless there is another pipe that is smaller connecting to that same structure, you can use that smaller pipe size. When it comes to your pipe material, FDOT does have a culvert service life estimator tool on their website that you can utilize in order to determine the appropriate pipe material. You will need to abide by the maximum pipe lengths that are outlined in the drainage manual. And then for your side drains, when it comes to sizing those, you can utilize the larger of either the upstream or downstream side drain that's closest to your site. You can use the larger of those two, or you can provide calculations showing that the pipe has the capacity for what you're putting in there. Also, for any side drains, you can sump them up to 6 inches in order to meet any clearances that you may have. All right, next topic is going to be common submittal types. So any submittal that you put through OSP is probably going to fall within, actually it's going to fall within any 5 of these submittal types. So the first one that we're going to go over is the exception and traditional, which it touched on in the beginning a little bit. So exceptions still have to be submitted to FDOT through OSP, obviously. The review process is exactly the same, just like I discussed earlier. You need to include your drainage application, which is going to be signed by the applicant, the owner, and the engineer of record. You also need to submit signed and sealed topographic survey, your drainage documentation, and geotech report if it is needed. Also, your construction plans need to be signed and sealed, and any approved permits. Those are all the things that are a part of that submittal. For your master developments, note that the department does not typically allow for parcels and developments to be permitted in multiple phases. So the stormwater system for your master permit needs to be set from the very beginning. So it needs to include also all contiguous parcels that are under the same ownership. You also need to include the master stormwater plan sheet and the master conceptual drainage plan. And on that plan sheet, you do need to note the permitted impervious areas for each future phase. That way we can back check that once that parcel becomes developed in the future. And that's what we use as the back check for that. So for master developments, when you're getting your permit, it's going to be conditioned to note that any development of those out parcels or future phases adjacent to FDOT right-of-way will require a submittal of the out parcel plans and the drainage calculations for review to confirm the compliance with the original permit. This may include updating modeling, storm sewer calculations, and landscaping plans. You also need to include calculations for the final build out and the interim phases if it's applicable. Also, you are not allowed to mass grade the parcels flat. They do need to drain towards any temporary inlets that are there. This also may require perimeter berms to be installed. For out parcels, what you'll need to submit to the department in this case is a brief narrative stating the proposed improvements and verification that the permitted condition is met. You will need to provide calculations demonstrating that the proposed CN value or the impervious percentage is lower than what was originally outlined in the master development. Backup information for the master permit needs to be included. You can just put that in an appendix. Also, drainage maps. So for this is kind of important because a lot of times I'll see that the applicant will just submit the original drainage map. I need the drainage map for your site in the pre-development as it is today, not what was there previously. Even if it is the same, you need to submit that as well. You'll also need to submit permit modification for the site. From the Water Management District, we'll need that permit as well. And then if the master permit ran 100-year, we will use that to verify the freeboard for your out parcel. So definitely check that at the very beginning of your design, because a lot of times when you start to design your secondary system, your site does not have the freeboard. So you're going to need to build up your site in order to meet that freeboard requirement we talked about earlier. For minor modifications, very similar to out parcels, you're going to provide calculations showing that you, you're going to provide calculations demonstrating that the proposed CN value or the impervious percentage or that reduction. You'll submit calculations for that. Now, if you do have a reduction and that is shown, you do not need to provide any modeling. That's a common question we get. Do we need to do modeling for this? We have reduced impervious area. We're showing that. The answer is no. Just provide the calculations that the impervious area is reduced. You also provide drainage maps. You will always provide us with drainage maps. So just know that from the very beginning to have drainage maps. You're not going to hear that not enough from us. Also, any permit modifications to the Water Management District. And if your site does qualify, you can submit the FDEP 10-2 permit as well, which is just a self-certification.
Okay, so now we're going to go over some common issues that we see in submittals. So the first one is drainage maps. This is a common pet peeve for all of us. So we really need a quality drainage map, and it would really help if that's developed too for your pre-app meetings. The sooner we know what's happening with your site, the better. We have sometimes 1,000-page report. 100-page plan set. This is the first thing we go to really understand, what was there and what you're planning on doing. So some of the required information on your drainage map is to show the basin divides and give the area of each basin in acres. Include some flow arrows for your runoff patterns. Identify your outfall locations. We need existing and proposed contours on the respective drain map. And then make sure your node names are on there. Please try to use the same naming convention for your model as you do on your drainage map. That often can be hard to go between the two. Yeah,
I was going to step into. So this was actually submitted by an applicant, and if you look at this, can you figure out what's happening here? Anybody? I mean, there's nothing labeled. There's no contour information. There's not even a north arrow. this is our window into your project and what's going on. This is how we determine if you do meet an exception. This is how we determine if you're meeting the criteria that is needed. So please provide drainage maps.
It doesn't even have the state road labeled.
No. So yeah, prime example of what not to do. Please do not do this.
Yeah, just help us help you. And this is like Greg said, this is like our window. This is our first look at your project to understand what's going on. So in summary, your drainage map should complement your drainage documentation. So when he's mentioning having the areas in there, having your node names in there, that is the perfect example of providing a great drainage map, both pre and post development to us.
Okay, so some other common issues, we've talked about it at length, is freeboard. We are measuring freeboard not only to your pond, but to your site as well. So in this particular example we have here, you have a design high water elevation of the pond of 104.44. And then you have an inlet that is hydraulically connected and draining to the pond with a grate elevation of 104. So by an obvious check, that inlet is not meeting your freeboard. The other issue is we need to measure that HGL. So how high is that getting up? Is that 6 inches of curb that is provided enough, or are we going to need more? This is why we typically ask for your 100-year storm tabulations, and that's to verify that the HGLs have been contained on site. Another issue is your drainage or your driveway high point is at 104.5. That is not 3 inches higher than your pond high water elevation. So if that site were to overtop, it would just drain across that driveway right into the FDOT. Another little highlighted section there in yellow is that grassed area. If for some reason you are only meeting the freeboard at that frontage of your pond and your pond were to overtop, it would back into the FDOT right away through that yellow area. So we would need additional spot elevations to make sure that freeboard's been maintained there. So please keep all of that in mind when you're designing your sites.
So we mentioned earlier that upon approval, you may have a reduction of freeboard to 6 inches if you are using a hardened surface. We often will see a type D curb being applied for that. So in this case, we're showing the difference of the left and right, where the curb is being served as a retaining wall, and that is not okay. In here, we are still counting the freeboard from the top of the bank elevation. You're not getting any credit, whether that's a landscape wall or a curb sticking above. So on the right side there, that's how we are looking for the curb. It is flush within the berm, and then we are using the same top of bank elevation, and that would give you the likely approval for 6 inches.
And are you going to say what I'm going to say?
Probably not. So this is stupid. I mean, this is like somebody screwed up somewhere, and we had to get to this point, right? So you guys knew from day one that you needed a foot of freeboard, and somehow you didn't get there. So I don't like this. This is like an absolute worst case scenario of like, you still got to meet freeboard at the end of the day. Especially, this is probably a pond that's adjacent to our road. It's probably, let's say this is a 10-acre pond next to an interstate, you know, that the interstate is lower and the pond is higher. We cannot have any berm breaches, any overtopping that goes in our road. We can't do it. Could you imagine if we lost an interstate? That would be ridiculous, right? So we cannot have any overtopping pond. Now, how many of you experienced any hurricane issues the last couple of years? Everybody should have their hand up. Everybody experienced a hurricane issue the last couple of years. We're getting more of those. They're getting 100-year events now every year. They're not, you know, once every 100 years or whatever. They're every year. We're getting 100-year events. We need to make sure that we're designing these things for resiliency. Okay. So this is, I don't want to see this, but this is a worst case scenario. So we're trying to give you an out, but again, design it right the first time. We won't have this. That's probably not what you're going to say.
Almost. I can't say that. He can say that because he's the district drainage engineer. But like another reason why too is if this were to overtop, you have erosion issues and everything gets blown out. Like we've already seen it in the repairs that we've done with a lot of the storms. So that is the primary reason why we don't allow that figure that you see on the left side. Other common issues, just providing us with geotechnical information that should be in your calculations. So if you have a dry facility, we need the permeability results if your pond is recovering through the ground through permeability, sorry. I'm like losing my train of thought. Also, you need to make sure that you're utilizing your factor of safeties. Where sometimes what we see is we don't have any water table information as well. That's not supplied. There's just or it's in your calculations, but we don't know how you got there. So you need to provide that to us because that's a check that we look for. Dual hydraulic soil groups and also boring locations not being shown in the pond. So in this figure that we have here, in the drainage report, it's showing that the pond is along the roadway. However, in the geotech report, they are showing the pond as well as the boring that they took. It's in a different location. So you wouldn't be able to use that information to design that pond because that boring's not in the correct place. Other common issues are also blocking off-site flow. So for example, in the figure to the left, this is the existing condition. And we have an FDOT road that's kind of at the top of that figure. And that site or the FDOT road has a cross drain underneath it. And that actually flowed to a low spot that was on the site. And then in the proposed condition, we have a pond along there. So you have a cross drain that was technically coming towards the site, as well as the outfall structure for the pond is also going out to the DOT right away as well. But you see that offsite is blocked. So you need to make sure that that's not going to impact DOT's facilities since now that it is blocked. Is there anything you wanted to add, Liz? No, okay, sorry. Other common issues are vaults. We're seeing a lot more vaults within the district. So make sure that you're providing us with the manufacturer details for the underground vaults. That's something that we're using to check against your model inputs. The seasonal high water table, it's sometimes shown above the vault bottom. If that's the case, that's less storage that is available to you. So make sure that you are putting or designing your vault in the correct location, all that stuff. Also, volume counted above the ceiling of your vault. Sometimes we see that as well. Making sure that your initial stage is at the correct elevation, and also not including the design high water information for your vault as well, even if it does, sorry, scratch that. I'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay, so here is the other of laundry list of common items that we have seen. So we talked about the summary tables are not provided or they're incomplete if you are in a closed basin, not including the volumes. There's a good example of that in Appendix D. Submitting calculations separately from the drainage report. So everything needs to be combined. We need the plans in a single PDF. We need the report and the calcs and all the appendices, everything used in a single PDF. So just make sure that it's all bundled together. The initial stages in the routing, we definitely touched on that, but that's a very, very common thing. And remember that the criteria that FDOT has is not what the Water Management District have. They're different entities. We often are missing landscaping plans. There we're looking for mulch or anything that could actually flow to the FDOT right away and cause maintenance issues. This is getting a little less, but we still see the old indexes for the standards. Those have been changed a few years ago, and please make sure that you're using the new numbers for everything within the right of way. If your grate is below the 100-year stage in your pond, make sure you have included that in your routing. Modeling underdrain. So some ponds have underdrain that is connected directly to the outfall. So they are bypassing the control structure, and that flow has not been accounted for in your post discharge analysis. Erosion control, make sure that you have erosion control for on-site and for FDOT. If you are doing work along the FDOT, you also need to provide inlet protection for the FDOT inlets that are downstream of your site. And then knowing what what the proper erosion control is. Hay bales are not allowed. Knowing when silt fence or a turbidity barrier is needed. Mounding analysis for dry ponds adjacent to FDOT. This has happened either with a existing FDOT facility, stormwater facility there, and then a new proposed. So that is actually taking away the effectiveness of the FDOT pond. You also could have issues with slope stability there. And that kind of goes back to the berms that we were talking about as well, making sure that we have a substantial berm that is going to not fail. The driveway profiles, we're often not seeing those. Sometimes it's kind of thrown in as a cross section, but it doesn't have all the information that we need. And make sure that it extends far enough, both in the FDOT right of way and then also on your site, and include the high point as a spot elevation on that profile. Ponds need to be modeled separately. If they're hydraulically connected, we often will see the volumes are combined, but then they'll have an 18-inch between them. And then when they model it, you find that the 18-inch is not adequate to serve as an equalizer. You'll see different stages in the pond. So just go ahead and split those up and model those as separate facilities in your routing. The survey does not extend past the right of way. The statute requires 50 feet, and that's a minimum. We're looking at this for the issues that we were talking about earlier with blocking flow. So just make sure you have that. Make sure you also are picking up any structures that you're going to tie into, knowing what those inverts are, what type of structure it is. Are you even able to make the connection there? And then also, if you are adding a turn lane or moving the traffic over, then you might now have existing head wall is now within the clear zone. So that will need to get adjusted as well.
And what we've all been waiting for, permit approval. So this may take several resubmittals. We do make conditional approvals once we find that everything has met criteria, but we're still waiting on a right-of-way donation or an outstanding permit that's not yet approved. We can list those as contingencies upon our recommended approval. Same thing with the out parcel development that will require resubmittals to the department. That's just a contingency that's also listed on your permit. And now we're going to go through our pre-registration questions that you guys submitted. So the first question, how can I find historic authorizations to tell what requirements a redesign, redevelopment needs to comply with or modify? You can always reach out to Caitlin or the FDOT or your permit coordinator. They can find as-built information or any previous permits that were done for the site. You can also check the water management sites. They often have permitted plans or available stuff that you guys can download for free. You can also request pre-application meetings. Those are very good places to ask questions, and you can have a response within days, if not immediately.
I'm going to add on to that. So when you do request a pre-app meeting, first of all, highly recommended. Please come to that meeting with your pre-development drainage map and also post-development drainage map. That's very, very helpful in order for us to help you get through that process or the permitting process with us a lot quicker. Because if we don't know how your site's flowing, it's really hard for us to give you pointed direction as far as what storms you need to model and things like that. I told you guys would not hear enough about drainage maps today.
All right, next question. If a site is permitted through the South Florida Water Management District as a master, does this confirm we are an exception? Are there any cases where an exception request would not require modeling? We kind of covered this through the slides. Long story short, every property adjacent to the FDOT is required to submit to us to verify either exception status or whether a permit is needed. So whether you think you're exempt or not, just apply. It's going to make your life a lot easier. just because it was a master permit that was approved for the Southwest Florida Water Management District, that does not necessarily mean that there was a previous FDOT connection permit assigned to it. We are looking for different criteria, so you might still need a permit with us. In any cases where an exception would not require modeling would be those that we listed previously. If you are connecting to an existing master development and you're discharging through their pond. So we would just need to verify that your curve number was below what was permitted or that your impervious percentage meets whatever was permitted. Other instances would be if your site is not draining to the FDOT at all in the pre or post, then we wouldn't necessarily need any modeling for that either.
Next question is, if the drainage pattern in the pre-development and post-development conditions are both away from the FDOT right-of-way, why is the full FDOT drainage modeling necessary? Other districts don't require this. So if your site does in fact flow away from FDOT's right-of-way in both the pre and post-development condition, then you do not need to run all of the storms, period. All you would need to do is model the 100-year storms, so that way we can verify the freeboard for your site. That's why we do require the modeling for those 100-year storms. The next question is clarifications on the exception when the site has existing pervious and new impervious being added. So for example, if a site has about 4,000 square feet of existing impervious, will only 1,000 square feet of additional impervious be allowed, or can 5,000 square feet be added? So the answer to this question is only the 1,000 square feet can be added because the total impervious needs to be less than 5,000. But you also have the caveat that your site or your portion of the site that naturally flows towards DOT right away, that has to be less than 40%. So you have to meet both of those criteria in order to qualify under that exception.
So another question was looking for clarification on the discharge criteria. So by default, we are looking for storm analysis. And then if you are unable to meet that, you can request to do a critical duration. And in that critical duration, we are looking at only a handful of storms that are slightly increased, and they will always have to be less than the critical duration storm. This one's a tricky one. How far downstream from our outfall does FDOT crossing have to be that would still allow our project to be considered an exemption? So like everything we've covered, everything is a case-by-case basis. So this would be a good one to get ahead of and have a meeting. It's really going to depend on what is that you're discharging to. Is it a canal? That is, really the crossing is very far away, and you're contributing, 0.1% to this entire canal versus is it a small ditch that's ultimately going to make it, and you're actually the major contributor. So it is case by case, and the best way to do it is have a drainage map and discuss that at the beginning.
Yeah. Piggyback on that, then. Adjacency plays a role in that as well. So you need to be adjacent to the right of way. If you're, half a mile away from the right of way and you drain into a ditch that runs through a cross drain, then we would presume that both the county and the water management district are making sure that the pre-post is met. So.
How to know the drainage design criteria for a project? If you utilize the manuals that are available to you, you have the drainage manual, the drainage design guide, the drainage connection handbook. All of those are great places to look for what the drainage criteria is for each project. If there's ever a question, always schedule a pre-application meeting. We can answer those questions and vet them ahead of time. If you come up on something that was unforeseen and there's always an issue, or it becomes an issue, please reach out to your reviewer. We can, work on your behalf, work with Brent, try to figure out if there's a solution for your site. If it doesn't meet standard drainage criteria, there's always a discussion that can be had, but please utilize the manuals that are there. That's your best place to look. Am I doing the next one too? Yeah. What, if any, exceptions, variations are offered for the district's permitting requirements? Exceptions, variations, there are no. There's not a true exception or variation for drainage criteria. That is always an email or a verification from Brent Setchell. Those items are typically a reduction in freeboard, a reduction in ditch bottom width. I know I'm missing one, but as far as drainage, formal design variations, that would be with your roadway reviewers. I mean, those are usually for front slope, a bunch of different things. That's outside of my area of expertise.
I think to clarify that a little bit too, is the difference between a roadway design variation and a drainage variation. A roadway design variation requires a formal paperwork submittal that has to be approved by Kevin Engel. For drainage design variation, that's just an email from me. So I'm a little less, it's just a little email. So, but it is helpful when you submit the information. I know nothing about your projects. I got a great team. They do everything. I only get involved when I need to. And so when I get a request in, it's helpful if I get as much information as possible so that I can make an easy, well-informed decision. So I don't have to go, well, I don't have the plans. I have to go into OSP, log in, figure out the plans, get this, you know, if you get it all in one email, I know you're limited to 20 megs. See if you can fit it in there for me.
Yeah, and we can help you depending on what you're asking for, determine what information that he's going to want to see, and try to boil it down. You know, the less he has to look, have everything that he needs, but no more is gonna help expedite that process.
And I know that this isn't drainage related, but if you do need to file like an exception or a variance for your site through roadway, if you go into the FDM, they have a whole section on what you need and what needs to be provided. And that has been reduced down to like a form now. So it's a lot simpler than it used to be. But just read that portion of the FDM and it'll tell you exactly what you need as well.
Yeah, and just be sure that you're keeping drainage involved with this as well. We've had a few cases where there was like a special edge of pavement profile to keep a minimum gutter grade, but then that was causing a max breakover roadway issue. So then that got solved, which then affected the drainage, or you know, like some of these ditch slopes, they're going to affect multiple disciplines. So there's a lot of times we'll just both get on the phone together and work on it, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, just CC us in your email, even if you're talking with your roadway reviewer. That way we just know what's going on with your permit and what's going on with all of that. So sorry, not thank you yet. We got more questions. Clarification needed on photos versus street view. Clarification also regarding the 50 feet of additional survey outside the property line. So as a professional engineers, use your best judgment. We do accept street view as long as it's current, and up to date. Google Street View is more than fine. Now, the clarification regarding the additional survey, as Greg talked about earlier, it's just so that we can verify any offsite flow that might be coming to your site. And also that is something that is outlined within Chapter 1486, so it's required. Any changes to pond design criteria to accommodate the new stormwater rule for more stringent pollutant load removal requirements from impaired OFW basins. Also concessions for freeboard, initial routing stages, regional or innovative solutions, or et cetera. So when we're reviewing your permits in OSP, our concern is managing or checking that stormwater that's being transferred to the departments right away. So anything in regards to water quality, that's all with the water management district. So as far as concessions for freeboard or the initial routing stages, as you're going through your permit process, if you're having any issues, talk with us. We'll see if we can come up with a solution. If we need to get an exception or a variance from Brent, we will pursue that if we need to, but you do need to meet those freeboard requirements, those initial stages and all of that. So
I'll add on to this one. So obviously the new stormwater rule is going to wreak havoc with our industry, and you know, it's going to be challenged. You guys are going to have to get really creative. So we're facing some of those same things. Luckily, we're getting grandfathered into a lot of older projects, and so but I think one of the things that we're trying to take advantage of is even on a rural typical section is calling that front slope a vegetated filter strip. And then it goes into a ditch, and that ditch may have a ditch block, and then it has dry retention or whatever it may be in it. And then it goes into a stormwater wet detention pond. And so we're getting 2 levels of treatment before we even get to our wet pond or whatever it may be. And so again, you guys are gonna have to be creative to come up with those solutions where, you know, if you're doing a subdivision or whatever it is, it rains off the roof, it goes through a yard. You got to take credit for the yard now, and then it goes to whatever the parkway, and then the parkway has, you know, potentially, you know, whatever. So again, it's going to be creative. So I'm a little confused. So obviously we talked about freeboard. That's one. Again, that's a really case by case. It depends, because it depends on the size of the pond, how close it is to the right of way. You know, again, if that berm breaches or if you get that pond overtops, then what does that mean for us? And so that's really what I'm looking for. So as far as the initial routing stage, that seemed to perturb me a little bit. Maybe somebody that was an older, you know, years ago, we used to have criteria. We required that 36 hour drawdown for a wet pond. We don't require that anymore. We set that initial stage at the control elevation. So that was one of the slides you guys covered earlier. It was in there. So, and then again, those regional innovative solutions, if you've got something for us, we'll be glad to take a look at it. We've done several joint use ponds. You know, we're really good at a lot of things. You know, we don't necessarily like to maintain ponds. So, you know, developments like to maintain ponds very nicely, put nice landscaping in them, mow them every week, whatever. We like to mow them once every month, maybe. So if there's an opportunity to do joint use or something like that, and, you know, again, where we don't have to maintain one of our existing ponds or whatever, you know, we're always open for those as well. So.
Okay, and then the next question is, if the volume of runoff basin area to the existing FDOT facility is being significantly decreased, why is it required for the existing storm conditions to be modeled? So in this case, we are certainly looking for enough evidence and proof to make these determinations. It is going to depend on a case-by-case basis. And then I just lost my train of thought.
So if you can, you know, demonstrate that you are in fact reducing the existing runoff that is draining to the site or eliminating it completely, then yeah, we wouldn't necessarily need an existing model, but we need all of the information to be able to verify that that is the case. So again, I know we've said it multiple times, it's a case by case basis. It really just depends on what's going on with your site. So just make sure you give us all the pieces of the puzzle. We've got a good drainage map. We've got good documentation, and we can really understand what's going on with your system. And as always, pre-application meetings, you can have meetings with your reviewers. We are people. We want to work through this with you. We don't like seeing things come in 7 and 8 times. We want to get it done. So reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Yeah, and then just because if it is approved to not model the existing, it doesn't mean that the proposed don't have to be modeled, because there still could be freeboard if your pond is next to the frontage. So we still want to see that. Will the FDP's Clean Water Act affect FDOT's criteria or permitting practices? Will design rainfall depths and intensities be updated following the recent hurricanes and resulting flood damage? So for the Clean Water Act, where we're going to get involved with this is only on the FDOT right away. Remember, all these permitting, everything is going to be separate by owner. So we're concerned about the FDOT facility being permitted. And you can reach out and we can see, depending on what is happening there, what will be needed. For the rainfall depths and intensities, so those are updated. The drainage manual is released every year, whether they update the intensities. But we also do take the NOAA data, which is updated regularly.
So again, just to piggyback, so the drainage manual was updated several years ago where we got rid of those IDF curves and everything, and we refer now to the NOAA Atlas 14. So if that's updated every 5 years or whatever it is, then that automatically updates with the new intensities. So.
Last question we had for the pre-registration questions. Are there any changes proposed or expected for drainage connection application procedure or design criteria? As of now, the only thing that I know will be changing is for projects that are making improvements within the FDOT right-of-way that require an ERP permit. There is now some O&M updates that need to be added to that application, and you can request those forms from us and we can help you work through them.
Me again. So again, I think, and I'm just figuring this out now. We Central Office really done a great job of working with DEP to come up with a solution for FDOT projects to get through this O&M requirement. So again, if you have a project that requires a permit modification for the FDOT right away, they're going to ask for these O&M requirements. So there's 3 forms you have to fill out. The first form is not even a form, it's just you put the project name in there. It's pretty easy. The second form is a cost estimate form, and it's just basically the miles of roadway, and it automatically calculates the cost. And then the third form is, I believe Nicole Monies or I have to sign that form, and that's just basically that we're agreeing to maintain the right of way. So it's a 3 forms, that's it. You got to have all 3 forms, don't miss one of them, because then they won't give you a permit, or we'll get you through that O&M thing. So, and again, that would only apply for the O&M requirements for within the FDOT right of way for that ERP permit. Your on-site stuff, you're on your own. Good luck.
That was all we had. Did you want to try to take questions?
We do have a few, we can say about 15, 20 minutes. If anyone has questions that maybe you didn't see that was answered in today's slides or in the pre-registration questions, we're going to open the floor now if you would like to ask, and I'll pass the mic to you. Take advantage. He's here. Our reviewers that see these permits every day are here. If there's something that wasn't covered, this is your time to ask it for sure.
If you have a drainage map, even better.
If the pond's adjacent to the road, then we want to check that pond for. If that pond fails, what's going to happen? Yeah.
What? You could still have your pond could be in the back, and you could have an inlet up at the right of way, and then your hydraulic grade line could spill out as well.
Because I reviewed so many permits that I want to put face to name.
Okay, I'm Ron Morahan with Avid McAdams. And my question is about a site that's adjacent to a right-of-way, has a previous drainage map in the roadway set of plans. Then we get a topo survey where the basin does not match what's in the set of plans. Which basin area controls for pre? Is it what's on the drainage map or what's on our survey that says what actually goes to the road?
So that's best engineering judgment. So we're looking for you to say, hey, the drainage map may have been 20 years ago. A lot of stuff could have changed since then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the new drainage patterns reflect that and you can prove it, great, we'll take it. So I think that's the short, simple answer. So.
Okay. Right. I mean, we have a situation like that where the site has not been developed ever. But the drainage map, I'm believing the drainage map in the roadway plans was not accurate, didn't have complete survey like we have now. So, all right. And I've one quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
The Q connected, I think that used to be based on a 3-year storm. Now it's a 5-year storm. Is that true? That changed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was an update to the drainage manual for the storm drains are now the FDOT storm drain systems are now designed to the 5-year storm.
Good morning. My name is Rafael, and I have a project in Polk County. The site, only the north portion of the site, the very north portion, is adjacent to the right-of-way. But the right-of-way does this, and the site comes south. So we are not adjacent to the right-of-way. We have a county road that comes from the DOT into the driveways, the project driveway. So we are not adjacent. The pond is located on the south side. That is not adjacent to the right-of-way. The pond top of bank is more or less 10 feet lower than the right-of-way, the DOT right-of-way. And we are still being asked to do the 448 storms to provide freeboard and do a full permit submittal. So can I talk to someone else so we can discuss the project again? I don't know if
Yeah. Have you submitted a permit already?
Yeah, we had also conference calls and we explained all these situations. And it's more of a burden for the client and us also for time and money that is spent. You know? And we think that we should not be required to go through all this work.
I would suggest setting up a meeting with Caitlin and she and I can go over it with you.
If the site does not, I think you talk about that one. If the site doesn't drain to DOT in the pre, it doesn't drain to DOT in the post, drains away from DOT, that's an exemption under the rule. But it's like automatic exemption. And when DOT verifies that's the case, then are we required to submit the 448 storms?
No, you shouldn't be required to submit those. If you can demonstrate by submitting all of your documentation that you are draining away in pre and post, then your exception would be granted. It's really just we have to see the information to
And if you
verify
have a
it.
pond adjacent to the right of way, then you want to see the freeboard in that case.
If the site is adjacent to the right of way and you do have a pond, we want to verify that your site is maintaining freeboard. Yes.
Okay.
But that would
I-
be it. Well, if I'm understanding that layout correctly, of what you were just saying, that would only be a 100-year storm for we look at the FDOT and the Water Management District 100-year storm. So it is reduced.
I do want to provide a little bit of clarification too, because it is a common misconception that when you are pursuing an exception, that you don't have to do anything. And that's just not true. We still need to have a narrative. We need your drainage map so that way we can verify that. And it may require you to model at a minimum the 100-year storms just so we can verify freeboard for the site. So you can always count on like you're going to need those things even if you're trying to pursue an exception for your site.
And if there's an easement, a DOT easement on the site, but still drains away from DOT, then still could be an exemption. No.
I would just suggest set up a meeting and we can discuss it. Yeah.
Because you can share screen with us.
Hello, Ryan Powers. Did I hear you correctly when we first started that in pre-post analysis, the expectation for pervious is to use the same curve number? Because typically that's just not the case.
If you can demonstrate that all of your fill is suitable fill and that you've changed the flow patterns of the site by either providing geotechnical information for those soils, and you can demonstrate that it has changed, then we review those on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I will. You can go to the next person. I'll speak to that a little bit. And Liz, you can hop in as well. With some sites, what some applicants have done is they will dig out a lot of the bad fill and put in new clean fill. And if you decide to do that, you need to provide that geotechnical information, but also it does need to be notated in your plans that what type of fill is being used on the site in order to get that reduced CN value that you want to use for your routings in the post-development condition.
Yeah, and just saying, well, this wasn't mowed before and it's mowed now, and you're dramatically trying to change the CN. That's not gonna fly.
I can say that's the biggest. That's going to be we're going to be skeptical real fast. I can say
Oldest trick in the book.
Yeah, so I would be very cautious of that. And that curve number should be same pre-post. Otherwise, you're not comparing apples to apples. You're apples to apples.
Site was being filled.
Well, I leave the dirt underneath. The dirt underneath is still bad. The water's gonna go right through that dirt, hit that hard layer, and then still got nowhere to go. What are you using in your pre? You're using 80 in your pre.
80.
You're using 80 in your pre, 80 in your post. Yeah.
They got what we did. That curve number. That's all. all saying, so is it conservative? Not gonna be 88.
Concern is more the opposite.
Yeah,
We do have a
it's
lot
the
of
other
people
direction.
who are trying to claim that they don't need to attenuate as much as they do because they're using a much lower curve number in the post. So that's fine.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dominic McFall. This is just a general question on acceptable documentation. So for things like your storm tabs, are we able to use other software like StormCAD and stuff like that in order to, yeah, that's no problem? Okay.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
Jairo Rodriguez DiBerry. The question that I have is related to linear facilities inside FDOT right away. If you were to, can we change a linear facility and compensate the volumes on adjacent property? Or do we need to provide an equivalent linear facility within DOT right away?
The preference would be to provide it within FDOT right away. This would usually be obtained through right away donations. That is the simple answer. If you're trying to compensate it on your site, you're opening up a lot of other avenues that you really don't want to go down, just because we're going to have to get authorizations, approvals, we're going to have to get easements, and that takes time, and that could delay you getting your permit. So the preference would be pursue the right-of-way donation, but if it does need to go through your site, you can talk with your reviewer, and then we can go into that a little bit more. Did you want to make any additional comments on that, Brent?
And I think it's likely in your client's best interest. Getting a joint use bond agreement, other things. Can't just rely on, let's say, a permit, say that, hey, the water lease is in the DOT right away, now gonna be 3. I need some sort of additional to do that, so that's, it's a, it will together. They, I will work.
Sean Crow with Atwell. Do you guys accept regional watershed models that some jurisdictions require us to plug into?
Yes, we do.
So no verifications on the tailwaters that are used in those?
If they're already pre-approved models, then we don't have to verify the tailwater that was put in them. Just mention that in your memo or your documentation as to where that came from.
And then make sure that you have a appropriate level of detail for your site specific in that model.
Hi, Nathan Lammer with Kimley Horn and Associates. I just wanted to clarify with dry retention adjacent to DOT right of way. I know you guys mentioned the initial stage would be the 36-hour recovery. Typically with the water management district, you recover your treatment volume after 36 hours. That's the initial stage. I just want to clarify that for you guys. It's not going to be from that treatment. It'll be from whatever your overflow elevation is. Greg, I think we've worked on this on a project or two. I just want to make sure, because I know one time we had a project where we recover our 36-hour for the water management district, but then upon going to DOT, they said from our actual grate overflow, we need to check that.
Yeah, we're looking at FDOT and water management district is different criteria.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, do you want to go back and put that slide up there? Yeah, it depends on the facility. You can use you can do a recovery slug load analysis, even if it's not particularly required for that one. If it gets you something more beneficial, if it can recover in less than 36 hours.
Right. So if I run a slug load from like whatever my overflow grate would be, or whether it's a weir in the grate or however that works, that would be my initial stage for the DOT requirements.
Yeah, if it recovers less than 36 hours, then you can use the the pond bottom.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, right over here.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Thompson with New Lines. I have a question about, I guess it's a order of operations. We've got a project that we've got sort of right-of-way dedication adjacent to the site, and we've also got a drainage permit going in at the same time. And I've gotten kind of comments from both departments that drainage permit comes first versus right-of-way dedication has to be final and approved. Do y'all know kind of what's the best route there?
Caitlin.
Finish line or?
Yes, the drainage permit is like I think we've got like not approved because they want the dedication to be finalized but prior to issuing the permit.
So contingent, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not sure. It's somebody's thing.
Say, hey, this is the permit number, what is the right of way donation process? Because if we're done with our comments, it's kind of out of our hands. It's literally up to another department. The right of way donation has to do their part to be able to give you the clear to give your permit approved.
Okay.
That makes sense? I answer your question?
Yes.
He's gonna have to too.
So I'll say that's probably one area at the district we could improve upon is trying to make that a little more seamless for folks. It's you're going through 3 different departments at least, and we don't always do the best talking to each other. And so we know what we want, and we just kind of, it's your turn now. And they're like, what is this? I had something else I was working on. I was like, and so it'd be hopefully that'll be the next one of these, hopefully, is to include that process to figure out how we can do a better job of streamlining it. Because on the back end, they're getting these and they're like, well, what's the purpose of this? What are we doing here? And so we need to do a better job on our end communicating to them exactly what the purpose is, making sure we get the exact boundary that we need, of what that looks like. And again, there's a lot of these complicated situations where you guys are platting subdivisions and you're doing road dedications. It's like, well, that's a county road now. So do we need an easement over a county road or not? And then, it's kind of all these goofball situations that we run into. So again, I think early communication, early coordination on that, because you don't want that to be the delay on the back end of trying to get your approvals. And so it is a process. We have to do title work on it and just figuring out all the right easements and stuff. And a lot of times on the dedications, I think we write a lot of those ourselves because we want to write those sketches and legals ourselves. So even though your servers may provide them, we may say, no, we want to do our own anyway. So anyway, we can do a better job, but it's that's for next time. So.
So this is speaking to the critical duration summary. So if we're actually going for a permit, we're going to have 6 sets of 6 storms. And so are you looking for any storm intensity that all 6 of those storms are meeting pre-post in peak stage and rate, or is it just going to be the critical storm for any given intensity?
For each storm, you have several different durations. So whichever is your critical storm in your pre-developed condition. So if you have, say, your 2-year, not that one. Right there. So in this instance, so these are 50 and 100 year. Your 50 is your critical because it is the highest peak pre-development stage. So ideally, you would want all your storms to be less than that for that specific storm, all your durations, I should say, to be less than that. If that's not possible, then we could consider a critical duration analysis. I'm sorry, backtrack. Storm for storm. If you can't meet storm for storm, then that would be what you would be required to meet. Was it every post-development duration for that storm event is less than that critical P, which was the 50-year 8-hour at 6.2. Does
Great.
that make sense?
Yep, great.
Okay.
All right, to clarify, also just something on that question, you still do need to run all 36 storms. So don't just submit just the critical one. We need to see all 36.
We did see, I'm not going to point out people, but a few people slid in after. Make sure you sign in on your way out, please.
All right, we want to thank you all for attending. Just a reminder, if you haven't had a recent pre-app with me, a big speech I give, on your reviewers, when you receive your resubmittals from us, we are getting our submittals down by communication. So reach out to myself directly or your drainage reviewer, and we'll set up that meeting. If you get a bunch of comments that are not clear, or maybe you don't understand why you got them, have that quick Teams meeting with us, get clarification. Let's get those questions answered. So when you resubmit, we're having less resubmittals. Your permit gets approved quicker. Okay? All right. Thank you everyone for your time today. Y'all have a great day.